Like and follow if you love horror. I think Absentia is chapter 4, I can't actually remember. Due to the lack of business, thanks to the snow squall, Clark was able to put the group up for the night free of charge, so George could heal. They split 2 attached rooms and bunked down to wait out the storm. For the moment, they could rest in relative peace, though George had to sleep on his stomach. In the morning came a loud rapping at the door of Warren and George's room. Warren woke with a start. George covered his head with a pillow. The knocking repeated. Warren staggered to his feet and fought a cloudy haze to focus on the loud banging. Given last night's events, Warren wasn't surprised that someone was knocking on the door so early in the morning. But sleep deprivation coupled with a mild hangover made for a world of confusion. He struggled to put on his glasses. "Please open up. This is Sheriff Clintock, Adirondack Sheriff's Department. I need to speak to George McGinnis." The sheriff's words brought Warren round to the world again. Right, Warren muttered to himself as he staggered over to George. "Up, buddy. Sheriff's probably going to want a statement or something." He nudged him with a foot. George hissed in pain. "I swear to God, Wedgie." He used Warren's nickname, but his voice held a clear tone of anger. "I'll put you right through that goddamn window." He fought to sit up as his wound was He fought to sit up as his wound was stiff and a little crusty. "Mr. McGinnis, if you please." Another knock came at the door. George begrudgingly limped over without his leg brace and opened the door a crack. Warren curled back up in bed. The sheriff looked at George, and this time didn't have the same pleasant look as the day before. "Good morning, Ossifer. How can we be of service?" George said pleasantly. "I need to get your statement of the disappearance of Kenny Alder." George's pleasantries had no effect on the sheriff's stone face. George nodded. "Of course. Why don't we have a seat downstairs in the lounge? I'll buy you a coffee." The coffee was free, of course, and the sheriff didn't seem to find George's joke funny. "Just give me a moment to get dressed." George met with Sheriff Clintock and gave his statement. He left out the part where he thought the kid might have taken a stab at him and shrugged the wound off as part of the bear attack. He simply couldn't think of a saner explanation. "You say you saw the bear?" the sheriff asked, taking notes. "No, but I can't figure what else could carry away a full-grown man and leave a large wound in my shoulders," George stated. There's supposed to be a quotation mark here, but it's missing. "Kids said they were gonna kill us all. Not who. Way I see it, he snuck out to smoke behind the... Way I see it, he stuck a smoke... Jesus, I am really struggling with this sentence. He snuck a smoke behind the chaperone's back, probably out by the dumpster. Maybe a couple of large brown bears were getting a snack. Kid panics and runs for the hills. Gets caught in the whiteout, ends up in the lake." "And you saw him on the lake?" the sheriff asked. "Yeah, I saw him there. I went out on the lake to get him. I found him in the snow, but then he got away from me," George explained. "He got away from you?" The sheriff looked up from his notes. "He was panicked, trying to get away from the lodge as quickly as possible. He was out of his mind, fighting me so I couldn't take him back." George's anger and frustration was rising. He felt as if the sheriff's tone was getting accusatory. "I tried to grab him, but he was so panicked he ran off into the fucking snow and likely got himself killed." George thumped the table. "You think that isn't going to haunt me for the rest of my damn life? I could have saved that kid." The sheriff held up his hands. "Easy there, Mr. McGinnis. I just have to get all the facts straight. There's going to be a lot of questions why a kid went missing at prom, and you're the only one to see him before he vanished. We've got no tracks, no blood from an attack, no evidence of a struggle or wild animal. The damn snow just covers everything up. We might not find him until the thaw, and until then we have his parents to answer to." George nodded. He spent a lot of time feeling sorry for himself and didn't even consider how the kid's parents were suffering. "I'm sorry, it's just, I could have done something, you know? If I could have just grabbed him." I don't think I'm the only person to tell you this, but there's nothing you could do. So let me explain it in a way that might make sense. The squall had cleared up, the sun is shining, the temperature has risen, and our search and rescue teams have already exhausted most of their capacity trying to find the missing kid. You did what paid professionals go through years of training to do, and you got luckier than they frequently are. What's more, you survived it, and with all the forces of nature against you. I'm sorry I was giving you a hard time, it's just the nature of the job. George nodded again. He was done feeling sorry for himself. Thanks, you don't know how that helps. Figured it might. You take care now. Thanks for the coffee. The sheriff seemed to force a smile and finally appreciated the punchline of George's free coffee joke. George lit up a bit and moved over to the lodge where the breakfast was. The room was filled with teenagers. Half were hung over and the other half strung out from sugar crash. They polished off nearly the entire buffet, save for a couple dry sausages and some overcooked, waterlogged ration eggs. He shook his head and scraped up what he could. He pulled up a chair at a table with intent on sitting by himself, but within seconds, Carlos, from the night before, sat down in front of him. George smiled pleasantly, though he just wanted to be left alone. I heard what you tried to do for Kinney. Thank you. Carlos's words softened George up quickly. He didn't consider himself worthy of thanks. You may not know this, but he wasn't the only one that went missing last night. You're kidding me. Did you tell the sheriff? George was almost in shock. That, Carlos looked like he was fighting for the right words, might not be a good idea. What are you getting on about? If they're still alive, search and rescue needs to get after them, George said, emphasizing how serious the circumstances were. He was frankly beyond surprised that Carlos wouldn't just go directly to the sheriff anyway. Look, last 3 weeks, not including the 5 that went missing tonight, there have been... He fought for the right words to explain and nervously looked around. Something more than missing kids had spooked him. Other disappearances. What are you saying? George asked dumbly, wanting desperately to understand. Some of them come back like they went for a casual stroll after having been missing for days without any explanation. But not everyone comes back. Ooh, excuse me. And the disappearances are increasing, Carlos explained. And that's just the kids. Some adults, too. Including the sheriff? George was still confused, but he could guess where this might be going. Including the sheriff. Frustrated, Carlos knitted his fingers together and leaned forward on his elbows. He was gone for a couple of days, then all of a sudden he just shows back up again like nothing had happened. So I told him the most rational thing I could. I said someone was grabbing up kids and killing the adults killing the adults that knew about it. He treated me like I was hysterical. Regardless of people missing, he brushed me off without a second thought. So what, there's some conspiracy and the sheriff's in on it? George rubbed his face, trying to force himself to think clearly. Are you listening to me? People are disappearing. The sheriff knows about it and couldn't give less of a fuck. Carlos kept his voice down, but hammered his point with his finger onto the table. All right, easy, kid. Look, tell me what you can, and maybe I can collaborate with your story for the sheriff. You're not getting it. Whatever it is, the sheriff is protecting it, Carlos explained flatly. And there's more. I think I seen one. Seen one? Seen what? George chuckled. Are we talking Bigfoot? Thanks. Thanks a fucking lot. I thought after what you'd been through you might understand. Carlos snarked. You're worse than the damn sheriff. He stood up ready to storm off. I tell you kids go missing, the sheriff could give a fuck, and none of that seems wrong to you? And that fucking smell, like ammonia or fuck, I don't know what. Those words gripped George deeply. He held his hands up defensively, trying to calm Carlos. Slowly he placed them palms down on the table inside. It smelled like a big old wasp nest. Yeah, Carlos replied. George thought for a moment. He might as well hear the kid out. Even as Carlos was letting his imagination run wild, George guessed he might be onto something. Okay, take Trail 12 to Cabin Lot 8. We can talk. We don't have to bring this to the sheriff.